let's talk about it.
Hello and welcome back to Thicc Radio, the award-winning podcast where we talk about gaining, fetism, and everything in their orbit. I'm James.
And I'm Tim. So let's get into it. Today we have a warm welcome to the show, a very interesting guest. He is writer and director, Corey Sherman.
Hello. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Hello. How are you, my love?
Doing great. Yeah, it's just getting ready for the holidays, getting nice and chilly in LA right now. I think just feeling very good after the Indie Spirit nominations. And so that's been cause for celebration in the Big Boys family. So yeah, happy to be here. Happy to talk about the movie.
That's fantastic. The non-American in the room has to ask, when you say it's starting to get chilly in America, what is that in the Fahrenheit? So I can do a little conversion to the Celsius.
Well, this isn't a great standard because it's LA, but it's like 50s and 60s in LA, which feels colder than it actually is.
Okay. To be fair, converting that to Celsius, that's like 10, 15 degrees. That's about a winter in Australia, quite frankly.
Okay.
So that's translatable.
Okay, good. I'm glad that makes sense.
Fabulous. Rich cultural exchange happening here on the pod. Love it, love it, love it. But of course, we're talking to you today, Corey, because I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but you happened to write and direct this film called Big Boys. Were you aware of this?
Yes, that came to my attention.
It came to your attention. Fabulous. Look, it's good to check these things, of course.
Totally.
Listen, we've had the opportunity to review Big Boys here on the podcast. So, first of all, listeners, if you have not listened to this review, we're going to encourage you, go back and check it out. Because as you all very well know, our review series on this podcast is essentially Tim and I soldiering on through the muck and mire that is the majority of any product that addresses gaining fetism or fat people in general. It is not a good time for us. It is never fun until we had someone, and actually he was our guest for the episode, Sam, recommended that we check out Big Boys. We watched the trailer, thought, okay, this... Listen, I'm not getting the sort of goosebumps of fear. These are just goosebumps of this looks all right. And then we got to watch it, and it was a fabulous film. So, before obviously we get into all of the chats for today, we did that. Corey did the thing. It was fabulous. Go and listen to the episode, and also watch the movie because it's pretty fucking good. I'm not gonna lie, it's pretty bloody great. And so just here in the episode, allow us to, rather than in review mode, just tell you directly. It was a great film. Well done.
Thank you so much.
Kicking off then, I guess, actually, for everyone listening who is unfamiliar with you, obviously you've directed this film, but we're going to bring it back for a sec. I would love if you could share with us your own queer journey and how you sort of enmesh yourself with the bear community.
Yeah, I mean, I would say my queer journey started alongside my learning about the bear community, because when I first started to realize that I might be gay, that I was attracted to guys, it was immediately to bears and like that body type, like big guys and hairy guys and guys with sort of just like a sort of masculinity that was sort of like specific to being chubby, and like there was something very empowering about that. And I read up on the community. I remember it being like a big moment for me when I read the Andrew Sullivan article about Bear Week in Provincetown, and like just learning about the community. And honestly, it was sort of a frustrating time because I was a teenager, and so like it wasn't appropriate for me to really like join the community yet, but I could see it on the horizon. And so there was sort of like a countdown until college. And then when I went to school out here in LA, I just dove right in and started going to bars like the Eagle and Fault Line and meeting guys on apps like Growler and stuff like that. And that was really like, immediately felt like, oh, this is sort of like the moment I've been waiting for. And it was really, really fun. And I am I would say a proud member of the bear community and have been ever since.
That's fabulous. I mean, growing up in Australia, Again, I think everyone can really relate to this, but certainly when you grow up in a culture that is certainly very devoid of a lot of queerness, and then you lovingly around our age bracket, I imagine, begin to discover the internet and you go, oh wow, there are more things out there than what people kind of lead you to believe that there could be, and you see people who match an image that you go, oh, I resonate with this. This actually makes a lot of sense. For me, growing up, there was certainly that element of I think I'm gay, but I
Mm,
don't like this. You
hmm
know, no shade to Chris Colfer, but the Kurt on Glee that everyone is uplifting, and I'm just like, nah, this is not doing it. And if this is what it means to be gay, then I guess I'm not gay. And then you understand about these other categories of humans that, uh, not for no good reason, don't get shown in
Sure.
positive lights or, you know, advertised to the wider world. And you just go, oh, this is the metric. This is the framework that I need to engage with. And I think everyone can relate to that first opportunity you get to really engage with people who match that expectation, and it's transformative. It's a moment of fulfillment, and you know, yeah. Tim, talk to us about this because you know you've shared with us in the past about how bar culture has really shifted. But what was it like for you when you first started going out into spaces and really encountering people that you wanted to meet?
Uh, Cleveland didn't have a bear bar, unfortunately. They did have a leather bar where sometimes bear clientele would frequent, but they were also kind of dispersed all throughout all of the dance clubs that were popular at the time. And at 21, I was deeply in denial about the kind of men that I was attracted to or the kind of man that I wanted to be. So while I may have, privately, I was on Grommr and Belly Builders and all the old websites and things like that. But publicly, I was dating guys that looked like me, and not uncommon of that era at all.
And I'd be curious, you know, obviously we're a podcast that centers gaining and feedism. Curiously, have you encountered or engaged with many members of the community, or is it something that, in your experience, is something that gets talked about a lot? Or
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely learned about it more as I've seen it pop up more just online in like the last couple of years. And I have one friend who I know is like interested in that scene, but no, I haven't like actually talked to a lot of people about it. So it's especially interesting for me to be on this podcast with you guys.
well, we're honored. I suppose. Well, you know, putting it out there. What in your mind is maybe like top of the list of things that you're curious to understand most about it?
I mean, the part that I'm really interested in about it is sort of like it's got crossover with like the bear and chub world, which is just like happiness and joy in being fat, like, and not looking at that as like a problem or something that needs to be fixed, but in fact, something that should be like encouraged and
Hmm.
celebrated. And like, that is something that only I feel like in the last couple of years for myself, I've started to accept more because even though I like really big guys, like, I still have self-consciousness around my own body and the sort of like voice in my head that's like, you should lose weight, like often from like a health perspective, but also just from sort of like a social, like in order to be more sort of standardly like acceptable to other people around me. And so I do find something, even though I've just sort of skimmed the surface of it, there's something like liberating to me about at least how like feederism and like gainer culture looks.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, you know, to speak to that, like, it's so natural that we have these hesitations and concerns because we all grow up in a society that says that there is only one approach to fatness, and it's that it is bad, wrong, needs to be destroyed, kill it with fire. It's certainly not approached with any form of genteel sensibility, shall we say.
Right.
But you're absolutely right that gaining and fetishism represents, you know, this beautiful liberation within body acceptance because so often it certainly feels like uh, people who might find themselves in the bear community or in the chub chaser community can sometimes approach it as a form of relegation. This idea of, oh, well, I want to be a part of who I consider to be the hot gays, but I can't because I look like this, so I'm going to be here and I guess this is me now. Or sometimes when people gain weight, you know, maybe it's for medical reasons, maybe it's for aging, changing of genetics and all sorts that goes on. There's a number of reasons, right? And gaining I think oftentimes ends up being the one real bastion of, no, no, I did this on purpose. I'm actually here as a form of joy and celebration, you know. And I think that does challenge people because there just isn't really that rubric in the wider world. So I think that curiosity is a beautiful thing. And
Hmm.
it's really good that you can acknowledge like that there are those hesitations, both whether it's considering gaining or just bear in size in general and how you might feel in your own self about that. We talk on the podcast about this because it's so important that we understand gaining does not exist as like a fetishistic concept just on its own. It's very much intrinsically tied to the bear experience, to the chub experience, to the wider plus size BBW, thick, curvy, husky, all of that gorgeousness. And I really appreciate your honesty on that one.
I appreciate the insight. It's interesting to hear about.
Thank you. But let's talk film. Let's talk you. Let's talk all that fabulosity. So, bringing us back, what really began your interest with film in general?
Really just liking making movies from a very young age. My dad got me a camera when I was like 8. And yeah, it was just, I loved making videos with my brother and my babysitter and friends. And that just grew over time. It was just always the thing that most reliably got me excited creatively. That I was the kind of work that didn't feel like work, that I just wanted to devote my time to and could and was a way of just sort of getting very lost in something. And then, I went to school for film and met a bunch of other filmmakers out here in LA and just continued to hone the craft, get better at writing, get better at directing. And I always knew I wanted to make a feature, and it was really just a matter of like finding the right story for it. I knew I wanted to have a real emotional connection to the story, just because of course that was what I figured would be like that the best movie would result from that. And also because making an indie feature film requires, it's such a commitment and takes so much out of you, that it was like, if I knew that if I had a real like personal investment in this topic, then my stamina would just be greater. Like I would just be able to make it through to the end.
I'm always interested hearing about this because, for a time I was at film school, focusing on sound, and, ultimately it didn't pan out for me. I found that, trying to navigate so many different voices, trying to pull together one thing was such a difficult task. I mean, of course, we got to the end, we were very proud of what we did, but I wanted to murder everybody because it was just
Yeah, yeah.
too many. It very much felt like the example of too many cooks in the kitchen, and yet we all had to be there doing our own thing, and that I found just to be so challenging. I'd be curious to know, how do you manage that? How do you manage yourself, the expectations of others? Because you primarily sit within that sort of director, writer seat. How do you manage all that?
Yeah, I think I try to just stay focused on what is the most exciting thing to me about a project. Like, what is the thing that originally got me inspired, and hold on to that core and use that as sort of like a North Star, and try to, I guess, just like, meet my own standards as much as possible. I mean, sometimes it's very difficult. You run out of time, or you just can't come up with like the perfect idea, but really like try to make every moment of the story just work as well as possible. So I'm excited about every beat of the story. And then in terms of working with other people, I mean, I feel like and this kind of thing can only come with practice, and it's something I'm still working at, but Big Boys was a great experience, and getting better at it is just like being really open-minded to your collaborators and choosing very carefully. In the same way that you cast actors, it's like casting your collaborators. It's like picking people whose brains really are exciting to you and can fill in gaps in the story that you never could, or challenge your own ideas and encourage you in a healthy way to sort of come up with the best idea possible, and who are also experts in their own fields, and that you feel comfortable letting them do their thing. Because the more that you like encourage them and give them free room to play around and get excited themselves, I find that it just makes the movie so much better.
Yeah, it benefits from that level of synergism.
Yeah, yeah. And I don't think I'll ever be the kind of director who's super like micromanagey. It's like very exciting to me to like sort of let someone loose and then more like provide the guardrails so that I know that we're all just sort of headed in the same direction.
Right, and I suppose it's interesting to maybe focus on the writing element there because having done stage plays in the past, people really do come in with a sense of, I wrote dialogue for this reason, I wrote the directions for this reason, even so much as your positioning on stage, if the blocking is given, I want you positioned in this way to really evoke and emote, but also, let's see what you do in the moment. Yes, I've positioned you here, but what does this give you? How do you feel? And, does this maybe add an extra layer? And now that we see it in the space, does this maybe shift certain things? And you're absolutely right. There's this interesting synergistic,
Yeah,
Synergistic,
yeah,
yes.
synergistic.
cinnamon stick? Cinnamon, no. No. There's a fascinating synergistic thing that comes on with creators and performers and that moment that people come together. I mean, Tim, you're a bit of a film buff and you quite enjoy a lot
Yeah,
of like silver screen and traditional Hollywood kind of glam and approach to filmmaking. I,
yeah.
I want to put this to you because I don't know that we actually talked about this in the review episode. What stood out to you? Sorry, not treating you like you're not here, but I'm curious.
No.
What stood out to you about Big Boys from that kind of production element perspective versus
It
the other stuff we've had to watch?
Yeah, I mean it was well, I mean it was of highest quality of the other things that we've watched thus far. I did feel that it felt evocative of either the like late 70s or the early 80s. And I know that there is a digital camera cell phone, right, that one of the characters was using. No, it was the cell phone. They were
Yeah.
taking pictures with the cell phone. So like that immediately was like, oh, this is modern, but it had the feeling of something of that earlier era because it had, I guess, this sort of innocence that a lot of those films had back then.
Mm.
They're really it was a very warm kind of feeling, and it even I think even the use of color, the diffusion of the color, it kind of lent itself to that style of film.
That's very flattering. I'm glad to hear it was evocative of that. That's cool.
So, I mean, you mentioned obviously at the start, there's this thing of when you think about the things that you want to produce, you want to create, you know that something that ties in with who you are, things that you know and understand, leads to the best kind of story development. So, do you feel comfortable sharing what maybe some of those experiences were that really informed like the original screenplay for the film?
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's so much of where this idea came from was from like experiences I had as a teenager having unfulfillable crushes on guys, just guys I could never have, but who I was obsessed with and just wanted more than anything else. And they were either older or straight or even, yeah, like a teacher. And there was just like a sort of hard limit on how far this could ever go. And I was just interested in translating that kind of story to a movie because in so many of the movies I was watching, it was like eventually the main character gets together with their love interest and there's some sort of consummation of it. And because that was not my experience as a kid and not seeing that in a movie or a TV show made it sort of feel like it wasn't a worthwhile experience or it was like a failure or it wasn't as dramatic or interesting as somebody else's story. It created this like feeling in me of like, oh, I want to push that and see if like actually that can be its own movie because I feel like there's actually just as much emotional stakes and just as much growth in a character and all of that takes place in a story where somebody can't get the thing they want and they have to figure out another way to get closure. And so that was like a big impetus for just being excited about making this in the first place. And then also, yeah, I mean, I was genuinely interested in the idea of like how can you make a movie about like a kid with a crush on an adult? And like that felt like a very sort of like relatable thing for me and something I knew I had talked to my friends about. And I was like, I think it'll be like both very funny and also emotionally loaded to make a movie about that.
I said it during the review, but I'll say it again. God, this was so relatable. Being that thirsty babe gay in the closet,
Yeah.
too afraid to say anything, having crushes on, the football jocks that you had to see in the locker room.
Yeah.
It was God, there were so many moments where I was like, oh, it was like it was the secondhand embarrassment and like remembering when it happened to me.
Yeah. I'm glad it worked that way for you.
In fact, specifically the camping element, because my partner had done scouts when he was young, and he would tell me this story about going to like the big jamboree that they'd put together, and there's this awkwardness of being that age where these things are starting to take effect, and they're in these ridiculously small and tight uniforms, and so you're trying to convince yourself that you're not gay and not look, but then everyone around you is wearing very revealing things, and so all you can do
Yeah.
look. And it's such this curious thing of when we try to shut off kids' sexuality, it actually ends up making that sense of sexuality so much more potent because there's no resolution to it. It's got nowhere to go. They still have those feelings, and it's like, well, what do I do with all this? And I know we talked about
Totally.
it in the review, but it was so beautifully handled. The notion of a child exploring their sexuality, it was so safe and it was so beautifully presented, and absolutely is reminiscent of the kind of explorations that I would have had at that exact same age. So it was just so masterfully done. And you know, you mentioned that element of collaboration. Do you feel that with the story that Jamie was evoking, that it was something that really came as a part of that collaboration, or do you feel it was mainly rooted in your own experience?
I mean, it started from my experience, but I think, and I'm very grateful for this, it started to expand beyond that when I was writing the movie and thinking about other people that I knew who I could sort of imagine in a similar situation because we had talked about experiences like that. And so I felt like that really started to break it open and made it less about like, let me see how accurately I can capture my own childhood, which I think would result in a movie that was only interesting to me. And how can I try to capture this kind of like these kinds of feelings and this kind of personality and like a way of expressing yourself that I think is more universal. And that was really exciting because I just think that made the character like richer and funnier. And then that just all like exploded when we found Isaac Krasner, who plays Jamie, because he just like filled in the character so much and made him so three-dimensional and nuanced and funnier and just totally made him feel like the realest person I could possibly hope for in this movie.
I mean, he was fabulous, honestly, and it makes me excited to consider where he may go if he chooses to continue with acting into the future. Just capturing such the active reality. And you don't think about it when you're watching something, but then you go, no, that's an actual young person who, yes, they're acting, but also they're a young person right now, probably experiencing those things right now. And so that is such a vulnerability to be able to portray like, no, this is the reality and probably what I'm genuinely experiencing in the moment. So hats off, this kid just nailed it, kicked it out of the park. And listen, focusing on this character here, I think this is really important because ultimately the reason why this movie sings to us is because Isaac is not just a plus size character who fits into tropes or receives the same treatment that every other fat character gets. You know, the fat representation and the handling of this character was so humanly and wonderfully done. And I'm so curious, when it came to producing the film and writing this character and thinking about how you were going to represent him, how did it feel to try and subvert what are considered to be these standard tropes of how we treat fat people? Was that an easy process to do, or was it actually maybe a little challenging?
It was exciting because it feels like such a massive missed opportunity by so many films to do this thing. And so I feel like as a filmmaker, there's always a feeling of excitement where you feel like you're doing something that hasn't really been done before or exploring something that is just beginning to be explored by the culture. And it's something I've felt since I was a kid. So it's not just sort of like a topical thing. It's like something that I feel very much in my bones, which is like a sense that fat people are attractive. So wanting our main character to have a crush on a big guy and having the movie take that seriously and be like and just present him as attractive, which is as Jamie sees him. And in terms of presenting Jamie himself, I think that a lot of that again came from but like a combination of like my own personal experiences and also just observations of the ways that I think like chubby kids like carry themselves and their insecurities, the way they move through the world, the things they choose to wear. Like, for example, like leaning into Jamie wearing like a lot of like baggy clothes, which I did at that time as a way of sort of covering your body up, like wearing a shirt when you're in the pool or the lake, those kinds of things that it was like I was just excited to represent the reality of it in an honest way, but a compassionate way. Like and really trying to hold on to like a hard rule, which was like his anything that's funny about Jamie isn't about him being chubby. It's about his personality. And in fact, and that was sort of a tricky line to ride because the character loves food. He loves eating, he loves cooking. Like he's very passionate about it. And I liked the idea of like you can have a chubby character whose passion is food, and that's something that excites him from like an artistic point of view. And it's not just about like, oh, he can't control what he's eating. It's like, no, like food is a means of like inspiration and like showing other people love and joy. And so sort of like, I guess like destigmatizing a chubby kid's relationship to food in that way.
Yeah, for Jamie, it's not just about consuming food as a comfort. He's treating it as a culinary art. And,
Yeah,
you
totally.
could see that character going on to study culinary arts in the
Right,
future.
right.
I think something actually very useful about food in that regard is I think food, or I suppose culinary expression, is almost Schrodinger's excuse to make fun of gender. Like, cooking is simultaneously a woman's job because she should be in the kitchen, but also it's a man's role to be a proficient chef.
Right.
So it's actually a brilliant mode of expressing a queer character expressing themselves because you look at his passion being cooking and you're like, it's not the stereotype about sport, but it's also not knitting and sewing. So like, is he gay? It's cooking.
Right.
What does this
Right.
mean? It's so brilliant the way in which you've taken so many tropes and woven them together to really allow this character to stand on their own. And I love that you mentioned as well, the excitement to kind of take the chance to subvert some of these tropes because you're we are living in a world where there are a great many subject matters that people do not want to approach with the kind of intelligence or sensitivity that they require to have those conversations amicably and respectfully. And of course, fatness is no exception from any of this. And I would love to ask, how do you feel your own experiences of being vulnerable with other men have influenced your ability to craft that in this film?
Yeah, there were some like very formative experiences I had being honest about my feelings with other guys, like regardless of whether or not they were gay or straight, and being like warmly received and feeling love in return that gave me like I guess like a faith in men no matter their sexuality and like an optimism about people and like wanting to make movies that are like fundamentally empathetic and treat each person like a three-dimensional human being and show that like particularly in this case where it's a story about a gay kid with a crush on a straight guy, and that's like the relationship between like gay men and straight men is like so loaded and is so often in movies presented as just like really hostile and aggressive and kind of hateful, that and I internalized that as a kid, and there was a lot of fear that I had then and somewhat to this day still have around straight men of like how much and in what way are they going to just like disapprove of me or lash out at me. And I wanted to make something that by the end of the movie created a real sense of like harmony and like mutual respect between the two.
I mean, it was beautiful. Obviously, not to spoil anything that happens in this film. So, again, if you have not seen it, please go and purchase it, rent it, download it, find it, watch it, talk about it, because yeah, the ending is fabulous. And I can't remember if we had this specific discussion on the review episode, but I remember watching it and something in my heart genuinely felt like a healing. Like watching this older straight man have a very appropriate engagement with this younger queer boy made me go, oh, this is possible. This exists in the realm now, and now that I see it, we can achieve it, and it is there to be had. And even though it wasn't my specific experience with older men, it at least in the moment felt to me like, oh, because I've been riding with Jamie this entire time, I am once again back in the seat of being, the uncomfortable 14-year-old teenager who doesn't know what they're doing, and I'm being, held comfortably by someone who respects me and I respect them. And it really was quite wonderful. And, anyways,
I'm so glad.
We like the film.
If we haven't made it obvious.
Yeah, no, totally hated it actually. Now that we finally got all that out of the way, yeah.
Give it to me. Yeah, let's get real.
But well, actually, do you know what? On that point, what has the feedback been like from viewers? Pertaining maybe to other plus size men or queer men and things that you've seen online. What has the response been like from people?
It's been great. I mean, one of the best things about making this movie has been watching it in theaters at different film festivals and just feeling the audience along for the ride and rooting for Jamie and cringing on his behalf and laughing with him and just feeling like a sense of like, I think like catharsis from the crowd and like a communal sense of like just recognition of like people seeing themselves in Jamie makes me so happy because that is sort of like the ultimate effect I hope movies that I make have on audiences is just them recognizing themselves and particularly parts of themselves that they keep very private or like experiences or thoughts that they're very private about and then having this sense of like, oh, this is a more universal thing than I thought, and like I'm getting to feel that firsthand in a crowd of people in a movie theater and then talking to people afterwards. I mean, it's incredibly touching, like hearing all people, all genders, sexualities express that they connected to the story and really felt for Jamie and could relate to what he was going through, and particularly from big guys and gay men, like, and particularly when they're older, like getting to talk to, it was particularly like an honor to get a positive reaction from men like all the way into their 90s that said that they felt like they saw themselves in this character and that this felt like something fresh for them to see because this movie was made primarily by people in their 20s, and so I was just so honored that we touched on something universal enough for them to relate to and to have felt some sort of, like you mentioned before, like in some cases people talking about it being healing or comforting and sort of like resolving a tension that they might have been holding on to from their own childhood, like, or helping to at least, like that is a huge compliment. So it was, yeah, it's been wonderful.
And if I may say, something that I really admire about this film is that I think that it's going to be sort of one of those coming of age seminal classic films that the future generations will watch. Like, so, oh, and is influencing the generation watching it now, the young queers that are able to see the film, because like I had films like Trick and The Edge of 17 and To Wong Fu, and like this is going to be, a generation's coming of age story that they'll always come back to. And those are the films that last. Those are the films that get followings.
Thanks. It's very, very nice of you to say. Yeah, that would be amazing if that came true.
I mean, I feel like the film needs to be recommended viewing. And look, we've obviously said this before, and we say this again for the most of our review episodes. A lot of what exists out there for plus size anything is negative, or it's entire comedy, where again, all the tropes are about their weight being the punchline or the source of the humor. And this is so truly unique in what it is. And I think that the reason why, I expressed before about this sense of healing, and you've mentioned 90-year-olds who resonate with this film and that spectrum of experience. And I think the reason why it resonates with so many people is because ultimately this just hasn't happened before. No one has gone out of their way to truly craft something so genuinely expressive about the authenticity of a plus size experience where we remove all of this crud, and it's fabulous that you did it. I mean, if I can ask, do you feel that tropes of size that you've been able to express here in the film, is that something that you particularly are planning on carrying through to other works, or is that something that's maybe for here and maybe for the right project in the future?
Yes, it absolutely is. I mean, I've made a promise to myself that I really, really hope I can keep, which is that if a character is ever presented explicitly in the movie as they are like an attractive character, I want them to be big. For just sort of going back to what we were saying before, is just like there's so little of that. And it was so deeply discouraging as a kid to grow up with no examples in mainstream media of like a fat character being presented as like desirable or their own version of sexy that is just as powerful as like a skinny or a muscular person. And like that is definitely a place I hope to be able to give some young people some hope or just better options than what I got when I was a kid.
Absolutely. I mean, Tim and I have been talking about Marvel stuff because I never read the comics, but like the films are fun, right? And I was curious because obviously it falls into the same patterns of like where the fatties at. Um,
Yeah.
Thor does not count. Uh, but we've spoken a bit about this, Tim, and you've expressed how really a majority of the characters who are fat are like Big Bertha or the Blob, and their powers
Yeah.
weight centric and it's everything to do with who they are. And it's like,
Right.
that's, what about the beautiful big girl who has the power of flight?
Right.
And like, it's actually amazing just to see her in this incredibly spherical form soaring through the skies. And she can just be fabulous for that factor. And it doesn't have to be, what do they class it as? Like gravity manipulation or mass. And I'm
Well,
like,
yeah, like because the blob can manipulate the gravity around himself to make himself heavier.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
you
there
know,
is I mean there's bouncing boy. He sort of flies.
but like,
Sort of.
but he's a round bouncing ball. Is that the gimmick?
Yeah, he inflates into a ball and bounces. I think a fetishist wrote that character.
Yeah, it does sound like it.
Okay, you know what? For fat people, we need our own version of the Bechdel test. We can call it
Yeah, yeah.
the Bechamel test, where it's like, can two fat people exist in a room and not talk about food? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
cle-
that's it's pretty good.
clearly there's a rubric that needs to be done here. But I want to circle back to a point you'd mentioned before, that thing of you want audiences to, connect with the character and realize that they're not alone in a unique experience. And it got me thinking, in this, in your history of production and all the different things that you've done, do you feel like through the filmic process that you've ever unearthed something about yourself?
It's a good question. Yeah, I mean, I definitely really like making stuff where, and because I'm so inspired by stuff that does this, of like being really honest with yourself about all parts of like your habits and your own ego and what what you're really looking to get out of other people. And like I feel like when I write movies, because, the easiest way for me to like write a character, especially a main character, is to just relate to something about their emotional experience. I definitely like discover things about myself that might just be harder to get to if I was just looking at it myself, but there's sort of like a comfortable distance or like a detachment when I'm looking at it. It's like, oh, this is something a character's going through. But then I realize like, well, this is coming from somewhere. There's a reason I'm interested in this. And so, yeah, I really like writing for that reason. It's like it definitely helps me to be both more honest and more forgiving to myself.
I kind of feel that a little bit with this podcast sometimes. Like if I'm writing out a brief and I'm thinking of questions or I'm looking to reach out and talk to people, it's sometimes in the dialogue with someone else. Like I don't realize that there's something ticking along in the background
Yeah,
that's like mulling over. And sometimes it's in that discussion in the moment that I actually click and it goes, oh, like that's what that means. Or because someone else said it out loud, suddenly I have language. It helps me to be like, oh, I understand now. It's interesting that
hmm,
art isn't just, it's all perfectly created within me. I'm just putting it in a format and giving it to you, so now you can have it too. It's like there is actually something very much alive and very active that comes from you. There is an active thread that tethers you to the piece, and then other people's
totally.
engagement with the piece feeds that tether through back to you, and there's an exchange, there's an engagement with that. It's quite, I don't know, that thing with art that people don't really talk about. I think maybe sometimes with film we get very used to it being like it's on my TV,
Right.
it's on a screen, it's a thing, it's happening in the background. But no, there's like a true artistry that happens there. It's quite beautiful.
Hmm.
There was one other thing that I wanted to bring up, specifically relating to Big Boys, because I was reading up, and you had done an interview where you had mentioned specifically that with Jamie, you wanted to be very particular in including other humanistic elements as well. So obviously you've referenced, this culinary thing with cooking, but you also mentioned things like the moment he's writing the list about like
Mm.
why he isn't gay or he could be gay, and some
Yeah,
of
yeah, yeah.
the verbiage, it's like there are elements of internalized misogyny there, and
Yeah, yeah.
obviously elements of internalized homophobia. And you had mentioned that it's because it's a very queer thing to work through this stuff, because on the other side of that is the opportunity for us to live a very fulfilled queer life. And considering how much you have imbued yourself into this film, I'd love to ask you, do you feel like you are living your own fulfilled queer life?
In a lot of ways, I really do. I think even like 5 years ago, I was in a very different place, both like romantically and also socially. I think for one, I didn't have like a great like queer community around me. Like I didn't have a lot of close queer friends. And like that's very different now. Like most of my friends are queer in some way, and that feels so good. And I'm in a great new relationship with a wonderful guy, and I feel very fulfilled by that. And even I guess even beyond 5 years, like if you had told my like sort of teenage version of myself about all this, I think he would be quite happy to hear it. And there has been like a nice feeling working on this movie, being able to sort of like visit that younger part of myself and sort of have like I guess just sort of like a back and forth, both feeling more compassion for that kid than I felt for myself then, but then also feeling having like looking back at him, giving me sort of like a fresh perspective on how far I've come and like everything that I have to be grateful for in my life now.
People say become the person that you needed when you were younger. And, I find it very interesting sometimes the way in which, and I'm going to say here specifically the gay male side of things, we love to have a transformation and distance ourselves from from the person we were pre coming out.
Yeah,
People love
totally.
to get done up, and people love to become this envisioned idea of what it means to be the epitome of queerness. And in the larger spaces we saw a trend not too long ago, hashtag twink death. And I
Hmm.
understand that, especially on the gainer side of things, but also on the bear side of things, people were really celebrating, that they once were perhaps smaller and now they're bigger. And of course we love to see them bigger. Yes, obviously it's fantastic. Mwah, chef's kiss, great stuff. But I remember seeing this trend, and I couldn't help but feel that it was evidence that we haven't done the work necessary to unpack why we went on the gaining journey in the first place. And that actually, when we curse that younger self, we're almost becoming the bully that we
Hmm.
were suffering at the hands of in the first place, way back when. And that
Totally.
actually the true healing comes from looking back at our past self and going, you didn't have the tools or the support. But thank you for making the best decisions you could, because bitch, you got me the fuck out of there
Mm.
in the fastest way you knew how, and you did that with no resources. Well fucking done.
Mm.
And it's beautiful to hear from you that there is that sense of communication, that in an opportunity you had to really revisit the past self, that there was a communication, that in a way you become the Dan to the Jamie at the time. And you get to almost have that moment with your past self, and there's a healing there. And I love that. I love knowing for you on a personal level that there is that transformation from, 5 years prior, if only they knew what was coming, and to hear what has come your way, that it would bring smiles and joy is fabulous. And I love knowing that. Speaking of the smiles and the joys, this film nominated for a Spirit Award. Oh my God!
Mm.
How does that
Dude,
feel?
it feels amazing. It feels amazing. Yeah, I like there's so many movies that have been nominated and won Spirit Awards in the past that I admire so much and are like the movies that got me excited about doing this. And so there's definitely a real thrill in even being like considered among those movies. And there's also so many good ones that came out this year. Just I've been catching up on some of the other ones nominated, and there's just like it's such an exciting feeling. I guess just like seeing indie film thriving and feeling like there's like really new and exciting stuff because people talk down about indie film all the time about how difficult it is and how much how little money it makes compared to the olden days. And of course all of that is true, but like I think I just feel like a real pride to be part of that world right now. And I'm also just very excited for Isaac because so we got nominated for the Cassavetes Award, which is for the best feature made under $1 million. And then Isaac got nominated for best breakthrough performance. And like that's definitely one where it's like I think we all felt it working on the movie of like he is so special. He just takes this character to such heights. And I'm just so happy to see him get recognized for it.
It's always fantastic to be recognized for the hard work. And I mean, from my understanding, these Indie Spirit Awards, like they are a big deal in the world of indie filmmaking. I mean, obviously you don't like set out to create the thing to get the award, but like,
Mm.
was there a moment in production where you just kind of like looked around at everybody, like doing what they were doing, and was there a moment where you were just like, oh, bitch, this something?
Yeah, there were quite a few moments like that. That particularly, there's a scene early on in the movie where the characters play taboo with each other, and Jamie gets up and starts dancing around the campfire. And I just remember there being like such a feeling of like this very like giddy, very natural energy, both from the cast and also from the crew. And there was just like a feeling of like this I'm seeing the movie that I dreamed this movie would be like unfolding before me, and it was such a good feeling. And I that is I feel very lucky to be able to say that that is how the movie basically feels for me to watch now.
That's fabulous. I'm so happy to hear that. I mean, look, I think we would be remiss if we didn't talk about some of the other stuff you've worked on. And apologies, I know we've just talked all this about Big Boys. And again, everybody go and check out this film. Listen to the way we have raved about it. Does this not entice you to go and watch something fabulous this weekend? My God. I was curious, because again, obviously did some research ahead of today. You were in 2 episodes of Where the Bears Are, like back in 2015?
Very briefly, yeah.
How? What? How? How did you get in on this?
I met Ben and Joe at the Eagle in LA. And it was funny because I actually brought my brother that night and he's straight. It was his first time seeing the Eagle. And I had shown him where the Bears are and we both recognized them together. And he was like, you should go talk to them. And so I'm glad he did that because we just chatted and we stayed in touch. And then they were very kind to invite me out to play. I was actually playing a director of a cooking show in Where the Bears Are. So it's really a full circle moment.
And obviously, you've had opportunities with things like I know you've done some stuff with Adult Swim, and I think you did a voice on one of those shows as well.
Yeah.
But like, was this your first foray like in front of the camera? Did it make you feel like you wanted more time in the limelight, or were you a bit like, oh no, I want to like stick my head behind the screen?
Um, it was truly like quite I was there for a very short period of time, probably like an hour of shooting, but it was really fun and I was a fan of the show, so it was fun to be on there. And yeah, I have been acting in my own stuff since I was a little kid, and so I really do like acting. I think it's really fun, particularly if it's like I'm just like playing like a depraved person or like an egomaniac or something where I can like lean into just like a really extreme kind of personality. And yeah, I hope to do more of it in the future.
Well, we will be keeping an eye out for you on that.
I appreciate that.
But also on that point, I had mentioned you've done some other voice bits. So with Adult Swim, I think it was Monster Night Live and it was 12 Ounce Mouse, correct?
Yeah.
And you wrote both of those with Matt Miliaro. But those were all very like black comedy, right? Because like that's what Adult Swim is known for. Is that kind of stuff a little bit different for you, or do you feel like that's more of a reflection of like, oh no, this is what you love to like really dig into?
I mean, I love that stuff, and it was really fun to work on that because I really was a huge fan of 12 Ounce Mouse. And I mean, I was just mainly interested in making comedy growing up. And to this day, I would say that's still my like main focus when it comes to making movies. I've just become more interested in the last couple of years in adding in a more like dramatic emotional element. And then, I mean, I loved working on something that was just so purely about the weirdness and the humor. And I hope to be able to do more of that in the future. But yeah, it was interesting to feel the shift because I really did sort of go from working on 12 Ounce Mouse, which is a really like crazy absurd cartoon, to writing Big Boys, which is sort of like a more quiet, soft, indie comedy. One thing I was trying to do with Big Boys was, while making it like a warm movie, still giving it sort of like an edge and sort of like a brutal sense of humor, like, cringe, that kind of thing, like stuff that still feels like a little bit like makes you uncomfortable, but hopefully in a fun way. And I could definitely see like the roots of that coming from having worked on Adult Swim stuff and my own weird sketches to begin with.
Well, and let's be honest, what gay doesn't love something that's campy and sardonic and witty? I mean, we
For
all
sure.
gravitate towards that. We love camp, so
Yeah.
Yeah, in the past few years, Tim's found it very insistent on showing me some classic camp films. And to be fair, like like Mummy Dearest, right? I've
Hmm.
heard this referenced a trillion times, and I knew it was going to be a 17-hour film, and I was just like, I just need to sit down and watch this and understand why she's mad at the dirt and why she knew where to find the boys and the booze. And it's that very like affected way of speaking. Like I can
Totally.
why people like zero in on all these little random moments. It becomes like a little through line to things like that.
it's a very lip sync for your life type of film.
Very, very that. With those
Hmm.
overdrawn lips, it was madness. Carpet madness. I mean, I would also like to know, what are some of the specific films that, like, when you saw them growing up, really gave you the bug for film work?
I mean, Spirited Away was the first movie that really, I think, just blew my mind and I got obsessed with. And to this day, I find it such an inspiring movie. Like, as a teenager, I was really into Donnie Darko. That was a huge one for me. What are you guffawing about?
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to pull a face. I've seen that film several times, and I will admit that it's very interesting, and I get why
Yeah,
people are very like, oh, I have to study this and figure out when the time jump happened and what the
sure,
loop is
sure.
and all that stuff. But I also remember so many people obsessing about this movie that it kind of ruined it for me because I had to sit in many coffee shops and listen to very long conversations about this film, and I didn't have anything to add because I wasn't fond of Jake Gyllenhaal.
Okay.
So,
Well, that's a tough position to be in.
yeah.
Yeah, I think that movie, as a teenager, it was such a sort of a fantasy of the way that I wanted to be seen, because Donnie Darko is such a sort of cool, angsty, mysterious, sensitive, intellectual type, and there was just such a sense of like wish fulfillment about it. I never got super into the sort of sci-fi mathy elements because that stuff is pretty tough to follow. But just the atmosphere and the characters, I was all about it.
Did you ever see
Um,
American Beauty then?
yeah, I like American Beauty.
I was going to say because that's kind of a lot. I don't know if I don't can't remember if they were released in the same year or not, but they're like very much in that vein of those
Just 2 years apart. Yeah,
turn of the millennium movies
yeah.
where every like they were doing that hard with the whole angsty teenager thing and the oh he's just deep and sensitive and he thinks a plastic bag flying in the wind is the most beautiful thing he's ever seen and it's
Totally, totally. Yeah, like very sort of like looking under the hood of the suburbs. I really love Richard Linklater. I mean, movies like Slacker and Boyhood, those are really, really inspiring to me. Like Greta Gerwig, Kelly Reichardt, Gus Van Sant, like very sort of like people who can just like capture the way that real people talk and just like a very sort of structured but still very like naturalistic kind of tone.
Obviously, there are other bears in film, I suppose, that people are going to be, recognize, like Guillermo Diaz, Dean Dubois, of course. Um, but I feel like a lot of the conversation, around, again, plus-sizedness in filmmaking is that a lot of it's bad because there is a lot of the gatekeeping that happens. Gay is not permitted unless it fits a very certain brief of queerness. Similarly with size, it's not really allowed unless it fits these certain tropes. And I would be curious to know, as much as you are an indie filmmaker, do you feel like those ideas of queerness, of size, are as gatekept as much as people might suspect?
I think it's getting better. I feel like in the last few years, people have just been opening up more, I think, to putting fat people like front and center in movies and television shows. And it's slow, but I definitely think it's better than it's ever been. And I think that there's still a lot to be explored there, which is just why it's exciting to me as a filmmaker. And I feel lucky that so far I haven't really encountered much gatekeeping or resistance to what I'm putting forward. I mean, in fact, making Big Boys was a very encouraging experience in terms of seeing people that I, whether or not, no matter how big they were, could identify with the chubby protagonist and root for him. And also people who shared Jamie's attraction to Dan and were just like, oh yeah, I also would have been all about him. And like that is another thing that's exciting to me because I think that so many people are attracted to fat people and there's a lot of stigma and shame around it. And people it stays something that's sort of like hidden and like there's not a lot of you don't see much of it in the mainstream media. And I that's like also something that I feel like is just sort of like an open secret that a lot of movies and TV shows aren't willing to explore because there's this idea of like, oh, well, they wouldn't be with that person. They wouldn't like that person. And they actually would. And I'm definitely excited by the idea of making stuff that shows that.
Or there's always my favorite response to whenever they put a larger person as front and center in anything. Oh, you're promoting unhealthiness. You're promoting obesity by putting a larger
Yeah.
like, when you like, do y'all ever look at a statistic? Do y'all ever look around when you go to the grocery store or the
Uh,
mall or anywhere else you go in life? You don't see big people.
I know. I know. That's the part that kind of honestly breaks my heart is the fact that there are tens of millions of fat people in the United States and there's just like so little
Nothing.
media representing it. It's like, well, we don't want to think about or look at that. Like that is actually quite tragic. And like I definitely want to fight against that.
Well, you know something? I'm gonna recommend that everybody go check out Michelle Buteau's TV show, Survival of the Thickest, that's on Netflix. Fucking first episode. She is a big bitch and she takes a big dude home and you see them mountain rolling. Fatties be fucking on the TV screen. I was amazed. I was like, damn. This is heterosexual, and I am feeling the type of way about this. Like, I am eliciting a response because, damn, this is hard.
Wow.
Like, that alone was doing things. And listen, I don't want to see no more skinny people rolling around in bed. I don't need like two sets of wind chimes climbing together or something like that. Okay? Like, looking at two big bitches like going up against each other, I was like, the power,
Yeah.
the force, the intensity. Like people are sat there trying to like make the sex look legitimate and look all passionate on TV. Baby, get two big bitches together. They will look impassioned. Trying to make that it was fabulous. So that's a
Great.
recommendation. But you're right, like not seeing yourself represented is frustrating. You know, people talked about this with Bridgerton as well. You know, the show's first two seasons were all about how trying to subvert the notion of, a prim and proper girl and a woman of color, ending up being impassioned and embroiled and having all this. And then season three, when it was finally the big girl's turn, they really pivoted. And they had her in like not great positions. Like a lot of fat lib podcasts were talking about how like why would they put her in this sex position? A big girl would never do this. Like it was very just like you were willing to go all the way there for other people, but why not this? And you can't help but notice when things fall down for a certain group of people, So bless you for the work that you've done and for the work that you're going to be continuing to do, which leads me to a very important question. What is next from the brilliant mind of Corey Sherman?
Yeah, I mean, hopefully more features soon. I really feel like I caught the bug with this one. I found it so deeply fulfilling to make this movie and so creatively exciting. And I want to make more movies that have a sense of humor like this one does and a sense of like relatability and I think like groundedness and fun. And I'm working on some new scripts right now and hopefully we'll get to work on something quite soon.
Corey, I think that brings us to the end of this special episode, and I just wanted to say a huge thanks to you for taking time out of your busy schedule to talk to us today. This was such a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me. I love talking to you guys.
Well, you're always welcome to come back, and if you have, produce more films for us, bitch, so we can review them.
I'm trying.
Yeah. Just if you could just churn them out like that, but maintain all the quality and have no dip in that
Say,
whatsoever.
he's not Tyler Perry. He can't have 17 films come out in 1 year. It's not possible.
We'll work our way up to that.
We'll work our way up to that. Fabulous. I'm really glad to hear that. But in the meantime, we will gladly sit here waiting in the wings for all the fabulousness that you will be releasing in years to come. We will be gladly here to review it. We've got our fingers crossed for you, of course, for the Indie Spirit Awards. Keep us posted on how all that goes down. And we're just really excited for you and all the wonderful things to come. So thank you again. Now, for listeners who might want to check out your work, where can people find that online?
So if you go to bigboysfilm.com, you can see all the links to where you can watch the movie. Or if you just Google Big Boys Movie, it's available on Amazon and Apple, YouTube, Fandango at Home, and a couple other different websites where you can rent it or buy it. And then you can also just buy the DVD on Amazon or Walmart.com. And we'll be coming out on a streaming service quite soon. So if you just keep up with our website or follow us at Big Boys Film on Instagram, you can get updates there.
Fabulous. And if anyone out there is a budding filmmaker, what advice might you give for someone looking to produce their own stuff?
I guess I would really just say follow your instincts with what you're making. Like, if something is really funny to you or just exciting, make it and try to make it soon, because inspiration can dissolve sometimes, like, quicker than you think. And so I always try to, like, if something really like strikes, I try to just go for it and start working on it. And it might evolve into something else, but if you've got like a wild hair to make something, I would say just go for it. And if you can, like, try to like follow through and finish it, because it feels so good, even if it doesn't turn out as perfectly as you hoped it was going to be. Just finishing things, even if they're very small, can give you a real sense of like accomplishment and momentum, which can just help create like a healthy cycle of working and healthy, just like habits of staying creative, which I know are really helpful to me when I'm in those cycles and those routines. Just make me very fulfilled creatively and just happy in the rest of my life as well.
Everyone, that brings us to the end of a very special episode here on Thicc Radio. Now, please remember to like and subscribe, rate us 5 stars, and leave us a good review. If you liked this very special episode, the podcast, or just us in general, please share it with your friends and encourage them to tune in. You can find me on Instagram and BlueSky at stannnum.
And you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok at ThiccMouse. You can also look us up on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok at Thicc Radio, or at our website at podpage.com/ThiccRadio. If you want to submit a voice note or become a financial supporter of the show, you can find the links in the show notes, and you can always write to us at thiccradio@gmail.com. So until next time, bye, Fats.
Bye, Fats.
Bye, Fats.
Let's talk about it.
Thicc Radio is a Patreon and Enter app podcast produced by Stannnum and Mouse.
Mixed and mastered by stannnum.
Our artwork is provided by Lokitu.
Our theme song is provided by Body by Cream.